Brought to you by 1AAuto.com, your source for quality replacement parts and the best service on the internet.
Hi, I'm Mike from 1AAuto. I hope this how-to video helps you out. And next time you need parts for your vehicle, think of 1AAuto.com. Thanks.
In this video, we're going to show you how to replace the upper control arm on this 2005 Ford F-150. And we show you on the driver's side, but the passenger side is the same procedure. And the items you'll need for this is a new upper control arm from 1AAuto.com, an 8, 13, 15, 21, 27, and 30 millimeter socket and ratchet, a piece of pipe for some extra leverage, a 12 millimeter 12-point socket, an 18 and 21 millimeter wrench, pliers, pry bar, flat blade screwdriver, torque wrench, hammer, and jack and jack stands. Start off by prying off the hubcap. And then loosen up these lug nuts using a 21 millimeter socket and ratchet and a piece of pipe for some extra leverage.
Then raise the vehicle and remove them the rest of the way and take the tire off. And you want to lift the whole front of the car up and put it on jack stands with both wheels off the ground.
Now pull the wheel off. And now turn the wheel. And then remove this 21 millimeter nut at the top of your outer tie rod. And then once you remove it, you want to just put it back on, just a couple threads. Now hammer the knuckle until the outer tie rod drops down. Now you can remove that nut and just set your outer tie rod off to the side. Now underneath your control arm, on the bottom of the sway bar link, you want to just remove that nut. And you can try doing it with an 18 millimeter ratchet, but most likely it's going to start spinning, and the solution for that is an 18 millimeter wrench and an 8 millimeter socket and ratchet. And then you can just remove that nut.
You want to spray the bolt that holds the bottom of your strut, and then a 30 millimeter socket. I'm using a breaker bar and a piece of pipe, and break that free. And then once you get it going, the bolt will most likely spin. Hold the bolt end with the 27 millimeter socket and take that nut off.
And then spray these 15 millimeter nuts at the top of the strut with some penetrating fluid. And remove 2 of them all the way, and the other one you just want to leave on a few threads. Using a pair of pliers, remove this cap. And then loosen up and remove that 13 millimeter nut. And then you want to just put it back on. Just a few threads, tap it with a hammer and make sure it goes through, and then remove the nut the rest of the way. On the other end of the axle, there's a series of 12 millimeter bolts. And you just need to use a 12 millimeter 12-point socket and then a pry bar to hold the wheel, and just loosen those up.
And you could also just have a helper get in the vehicle and hold the brakes to hold the axle in place.
When you remove that last one, just push the axle down into the side. Now spray this 21 millimeter nut up here on the bottom of your upper control arm. And then remove that nut and then put it back on, just a few threads. Now with the nut back on a few threads, just hammer the wheel knuckle until the upper control arm loosens up. And now just lift up on the wheel knuckle and then remove that nut. Now you can just set the wheel knuckle off to the side carefully. You don't want it to strain those brake hoses. And then just tap the axle and pull it out of the wheel knuckle. And you want to feed the axle towards the left side, towards the front of the vehicle. And then just angle it down and pull it down and out. Now put the wheel knuckle back up and push the upper control arm back into it.
And now we're just going to jack up underneath the control arm a little bit. The vehicle is still supported on the jack stands under the frame. Remove the bolt from the bottom of the strut, and you can see the struts in there still loosely. And make sure the nuts on the top of the strut are removed. Pry the strut out.
Now using a 21mm wrench and another wrench just for some extra leverage, loosen up the nuts on either side of your upper control arm. And then use the 21mm wrench on the nut and a 21mm socket and ratchet on the bolt to speed up the process. And you want to loosen those up as much as you can, but just leave the bolt in there for now. And on this side, it helps if you pull those harnesses out of the way. Makes it easier to get that wrench into place. Now with both of them loosened, hold the upper control arm in place and pull the bolts out. And then the upper control arm pulls free. On the right is the old upper control arm. On the left is the new one from 1A Auto. You can see they're identical and they'll fit exactly the same. Put your new upper control arm into place. And once you get the holes lined up, just push the bolts back through. And it helps to at least get one of them started. It makes the other one easier. And then the other one you can feed in the rest of the way. Then replace those nuts and tighten them up preliminarily. Now feed your strut up into place. Push those studs through. And then just replace those nuts at the top to just hold it. And you don't need to tighten them up right now. You're just putting them there to hold it into place. And then pry the bottom of the strut back into the lower control arm. And then push that bolt back through. And just make sure it's all the way in. And then replace the nut and tighten it up preliminarily. And we'll just fast forward as Mike goes back over those 15mm nuts, making sure they're tightened. Now you can remove the jack and feed your axle back into place. And you want to feed it back in the same way that you pulled it out. And then just angle it back down into the hub and push it in. And now you can take your upper control arm and push it back into the wheel knuckle. And once you push it through, just put that 21mm nut on there to hold it into place. Line up the axle and replace those 12mm bolts. We'll fast forward as Mike does this. Now tighten each of those to 60 foot-pounds in a crossing pattern. So you can see we torqued that one. Then you want to turn the wheel until you get the one on the opposite side, and then torque that one. And you want to just repeat this process with each of them. Now replace this 13mm nut and torque it to 20 foot-pounds. And then replace that cap and just tap it into place. Now you can push those harnesses back into place. And if any of the lines on the back came undone, make sure you push them back in and reclip them. Then push your outer tie rod up through the wheel knuckle and replace the nut. And then torque that to 111 foot-pounds. Now just tighten up this bolt on your upper control arm, and if the stud spins, use a 10mm socket and ratchet, and then you want to torque this to 111 foot-pounds. And then tighten up the nut on the bottom of your sway bar link. Jack up underneath the lower control arm so that it has the same pressure it would have on it as if the tire was there. And now using your 21mm wrench, you just want to tighten those up as much as you can. And you can see for the final part, we just use an extra wrench for some extra leverage. And just tighten that up nice and firm. And then repeat the process on the other side. Torque the lower strut bolt to 150 foot-pounds. Now we'll fast forward as Mike replaces the wheel and replaces the lug nuts and tightens them preliminarily, then lowers the vehicle and tightens them the rest of the way. And then torque each of them in a crossing pattern to 120 foot-pounds. And then just replace your hubcap, and you're all set.
We hope this video helps you out. Brought to you by 1AAuto.com, your source for quality replacement parts and the best service on the internet. Please feel free to call us toll free 888-844-3393. We're the company that's here for you on the internet and in person.